Long ago, all the Na'vi people lived in balance with the Great Mother. Then, everything changed when the Sky people attacked. Only Toruk Makto, the last shadow, could stop them, but when Pandora needed him most, he vanished. War. What is it good for? Well, how about for crafting complex narratives about family, individualism, the nature of violence, and the meaning behind being a father? When I first saw Avatar: The Way of Water back in December, I was absolutely blown away. So, immediately upon leaving the theater, I rushed home to end my self-imposed media quarantine, only to quickly be disappointed by the things I was reading and hearing. In preparation for this video, I revisited a bunch of articles and YouTube videos analyzing or reviewing Avatar: The Way of Water, and the consensus remains pretty much the same as it was on release. The movie is both the best and worst of James Cameron. It's a straightforward story about a father trying to keep his family safe that unfortunately gets bogged down with family drama, teen angst, and interspecies politics of genius space whales. Yes, the movie is a visual masterpiece, meticulously crafted down to the very finest of details, but it suffers from an overly simplistic plot that drags way too much and is filled with self-indulgent characters that serve absolutely no purpose. With that final criticism often referring specifically to Spider, a character allegedly as out of place in the script as he is on Pandora, with a retconned parentage, unclear motivations, confusing actions, and constantly shifting loyalties, whose existence can supposedly only really be explained through James Cameron's once tempered creative genius, now being left unchecked and turning destructive. Now, as I've already mentioned, I couldn't disagree more with this reading of the script. I think it's shallow, and it betrays a staggering level of media illiteracy and, quite frankly, sheer hubris.
Sheer hubris.
I apologize for venting there a little. It's just that superficial media analysis really grinds my gears. I mean, how is anyone supposed to create anything with deeper meaning when even those in the audience who purport to call themselves professionals would rather play at editors than look at a work of art holistically? So, that's what I want to do in this video. Offer an alternative and correct reading of Avatar: The Way of Water. One that takes into consideration all the parts and characters in the movie and doesn't rely on the assumption that your average movie review crusader on a quest for revenge against all the industry hacks who denied the world the brilliance of the first manuscript they ever submitted knows more than the man claiming 3 out of 4 highest grossing movies of all time. Avatar: The Way of Water sees us return to Pandora soon after the Na'vi successfully repelled the alien invaders back to their dying planet. The movie opens with Jake speaking directly to the audience, breaking the fourth wall, and narrating all the important events in his life over the next 16 years. The birth of his first son Natam, the adoption of his daughter Kiri, born of Grace Augustine's inanimate avatar, and most likely the planet-spanning tree-hive mind Awa, the birth of his second son Loak, and his youngest daughter Tuk. And we're also introduced to Spider, Colonel Quaritch's human son who got stuck on Pandora because babies apparently can't be put in cryopods necessary for the 6-year-long journey back to Earth. The standard interpretation of the opening sequence would be that Jake and his family are living simple but perfectly happy lives until the evil humans return, destroying everything in their path. However, if we put down our phones for just a minute and rewind, we'll notice that that's not what Jake actually said. And it all has to do with the very first line of the movie, and I quote, "The forests of Pandora hold many dangers, but the most dangerous thing about Pandora is that you may grow to love her too much." Now, I absolutely love this line, and I think it is brilliant. Without it, I would fully agree that the opening sequence depicts a happy family whose idyllic life is destroyed by a malicious outside force. However, if we look at Jake's monologue in its entirety, specifically keeping in mind this first sentence, the whole thing suddenly takes on a much darker tone. The best way I can think of to describe this opening sequence, specifically bearing this first line in mind, is as a confession. Jake is confessing his sins to us, the audience, at least those of us who aren't scrolling through Twitter. Through Jake, Cameron is very explicitly telling us that the story we're about to see is not a story about a hero against a villain, but a story about a hero against himself. For Jake, the most dangerous thing about Pandora, the thing that almost costs him everything, isn't Pandora's wildlife, and it's not the invading humans. It is his own love for his family that blinded him. A very common complaint about Avatar: The Way of Water is wondering how Jake didn't predict the humans would come back. And the answer that is most often given is that Cameron just didn't really think about it, even though it is the most obvious question in the world. Which is great, because now we get to criticize him for it and even further inflate our already gargantuan egos. Because it doesn't take the greatest filmmaker of our generation to figure out that if all Jake really cared about was keeping his family safe, the best thing he could have done was spend the last 16 years preparing for the inevitable return of humanity. There is unfortunately a very common tendency I've noticed that people have when engaging with pretty much all media, which is to project onto the protagonist both moral and objective correctness. What I mean by this is that people assume that the protagonist must always strive towards doing the right thing, and more importantly, must always know exactly what is the best way to do the right thing. In other words, what the main character wants to do is what the author thinks everyone should do, and if the main character is making mistakes, that's just because of the author's lack of skill. And this misconception is where I think the commonly accepted reading of Avatar: The Way of Water comes from. Because Jake is trying to keep his family safe, the movie is about the importance of keeping your family safe. But because Jake isn't making the best decisions to achieve the goal of keeping his family safe, James Cameron sucks at storytelling. When in reality, Cameron agrees. Jake should have known the humans would be back, and he should have been preparing this whole time. And he tells us exactly why he wasn't. Because he was selfish. Because doing something would have meant giving up the beautiful and comfortable life he grew to love too much. You see, being the global commander of a decade-and-a-half-long project to rapidly industrialize a whole planet from a hunter-gatherer society to something that can withstand an invasion from a space-age level species is a job that doesn't really leave much time for playing tag with your kids. So, the way I see it, from the very first line, Cameron invites the audience to question Jake in both his goals and the strategies he employs to achieve those goals. And this is far from the only time we should be asking ourselves, what the hell is Jake doing? The real story begins 1 year after the humans return to Pandora. Colonel Quaritch is back in an Avatar body and is given a special mission to assassinate Jake Sully. Because over the last year, Jake has been leading very successful raids against the human operation, attacking distant outposts and disrupting supply lines. The most recent of these raids being the derailment of an armored supply train. Now, apart from this scene being the first time my jaw dropped from the incredible fidelity and sheer crispness of the things I was seeing, this is also the first time we are properly introduced to Jake's two sons, the older and well-behaved Neteam, and the younger, rebellious Loak. During the raid, they disobey Jake's direct orders and put themselves in harm's way. So, when they all return back to high camp in the Hallelujah Mountains, Jake plays the military dad and yells at his sons a little bit while one of them is bleeding out in front of him, for which Neytiri calls him out, both immediately but also later. She tells him, "Your sons try to live up to you, but you are very hard on them. This is not a squad, this is a family." And at first, Jake protests a little, but actually crumbles quite quickly. Really, there are very valid reasons for Jake to be mad at his sons. They left their assigned post during a military operation. Someone could have gotten seriously hurt or killed because of it. Except, back while Jake was searching through the rubble for Neteam, he first comes across another injured Na'vi. Now, we don't really know if they're dead or just unconscious, but neither does Jake. He barely spares them a glance to make sure it's not Neteam before he moves on. Jake is the chief, and this is one of his people. But what does he do? He doesn't check if they're alive, doesn't help them, doesn't even bother to call for help. He just leaves them there. To be fair, this is a very minor detail, easy to miss if you're glancing down at Instagram all the time, but I think it's very revealing of what's the primary, or really the only thing Jake cares about. He tells Neytiri, "I thought we lost them," essentially admitting she is correct, that he acted poorly and that he acted entirely out of fear, the fear of losing someone he loved. Which means that, if we've been paying attention and remember the first line about the dangers of loving something too much, we should realize that Neytiri is the one in the morally superior position here. When she grabs Jake's hand to comfort him in the end, the implication is she fears for their children too, but she didn't let that fear control her. Now, if you go into this movie with the ironclad belief that Jake is always right simply because he is the protagonist, this scene is just Neytiri nagging Jake. Pointless family drama, Cameron included, to pad out the movie to 3 hours. However, if we examine it critically, remembering Jake's own admission of the dangers of loving something too much, we can conclude that here Cameron is inviting us to detach ourselves from Jake and no longer view him as this story's arbiter of morality. When Jake introduces us to Spider in the opening sequence of the movie, he says that to Neytiri, Spider would always be alien, one of them. Yet while he's saying that, the movie shows him standing right next to her. Now, if you think this is too subtle of a narrative device to be taken as a sign of anything, fine. Except, Jake explicitly tells us 10 seconds earlier he doesn't consider Spider a part of his family either. To him, Spider is like, and I quote, a stray cat, and he treats him like one. When Quaritch and his men capture Locke, Kiri, Took, and Spider, Jake and Neytiri naturally rush to save them. On a quick side note, Neteyam is actually with them, but when they get to position, Jake tells him to stay back. Again, so consumed by fear of losing a child, he would rather risk failing completely by engaging a whole platoon of well-trained and highly armed soldiers with 2 people instead of 3. And fail he would if Neteyam had listened to him. During the fight, one of Quaritch's soldiers gets a headshot on Neytiri and is about to pull the trigger when Neteyam kills him. Just another nod towards the audience at Jake's piss-poor decision-making in this movie. Anyway, Jake and Neytiri, with Neteyam's unsolicited help, manage to liberate their children and Spider. However, while they're running away, Spider slips and falls. My question is very simple. Would Jake and Neytiri have kept running if it was Loak, or Took, or even Kiri who had slipped? Or would they have turned around and fought all of Quaritch's soldiers the best they could to save their child? Now, I think that the answer to that question is fairly obvious. However, let's be generous and assume that at that point it truly was over. Quaritch's reinforcements had arrived, and there was nothing Jake and Neytiri could have done to save whoever had slipped. My second question then is, would Jake have run away if it was one of his children Quaritch had locked up in a glass cell? As Jake and his family are leaving the forest to join the Sea Clans, Jake has another voiceover addressed directly to the audience. And at one point he says, "A father protects. It's what gives him meaning." But for me, this isn't Cameron's endorsement of Jake's actions as some perfect embodiment of the father figure. As Jake is saying this, we are shown his family, one after the other, all looking back at the forest. I think this line is Jake, once again, confessing his sins. The whole sequence of Jake and his family running away is very purposefully broken up with Spider getting tortured for information and then saved by Quaritch. When Quaritch tells Spider, "You and I, we're nothing to each other," technically he is correct. They're not related by blood, and they're not even the same species. However, if we put on our detective hats and look at both Quaritch's and Spider's actions, we can easily deduce that Quaritch is lying here, probably as much to himself as he is to Spider. When Quaritch first realizes who Spider is, he is taken aback, while everyone else in his party doesn't seem to care either way. And the way Spider delivers the news, saying "you can't put babies in cryo, dipshit," assigning some sort of moral blame for his situation to Quaritch. And of course, the most important piece of evidence being that Quaritch does save Spider from being tortured, and he takes him under his wing. And here I think is where we arrive at the first question Cameron is asking with this movie, which is, what is family? A father protects. But to Cameron, that's a given. What he wants to know and what he wants us to think about is who are those who deserve that protection. And this is a very complicated question, so to make it easier, James made it multiple choice. He offers us two answers. One, that family is just blood. Jake abandons everything and everyone so he can keep his biological children as safe as they can be. Or two, that family is responsibility. Now, this might not be the most perfect word to use here, but it is the best one I can think of. Quaritch and Spider are, as we've already established, objectively nothing to each other. However, as the clone of Spider's dead father, Quaritch does feel some sort of a responsibility for him. Now, this next hour of the movie is most often labeled as teen drama hour, where the plot stagnates and nothing really happens. Which is not at all true, but I understand why it might feel like that. Again, if you're still watching the movie with the already mentioned assumption that Jake must always be right, of course you're going to hate this part. In the whole hour, Jake is only on screen for a couple of minutes, and in those couple of minutes, all he does is lecture his son. But that's because after this point, Cameron actually betrays Jake as the primary protagonist. After the Sullys settle in amongst the Metcaina, the plot focuses almost entirely on Jake's younger son and the second question Cameron is asking with this movie. What does it mean to protect someone? So after James is done showing us all the cool sea creatures he spent half a decade designing, Loak's story opens with a bunch of reef kids, led by Chief Tonowari's son Aonung, making fun of Kiri. Loak immediately jumps in to defend Kiri, even though it's 4 against 1, so he quickly gets overwhelmed, at which point Natam steps in and manages to defuse the situation, at least for a moment. But as the Sully kids are leaving, Aonung calls them all freaks, so Loak goes back and decks him in the face. And at first glance, it's just boring bullying drama. But this scene has an important purpose, especially the way it was acted and presented. It was meant to directly parallel and remind the audience of the opening scene of the first Avatar, where Jake, back on Earth and despite being in a wheelchair, attacks this much larger guy because he was being abusive to some girl. The way Loak approaches Aonung, lowers his guard, and gets close to him by being like, "Look at my funny fist," before punching him 3 times in the face, not giving him a moment to regain himself, it's all Jake. From the first movie, of course. Loak is full of this cocky self-righteousness of someone so certain they're doing the right thing, and the whole universe couldn't convince them otherwise. You see, so far, we have only been shown one strategy for keeping your family safe. Jake's, which is to run away and hide. But through Loak, and especially through his relationship with Payakan later on, and we'll get to that in a moment, Cameron presents us with an alternative option: fight back. So finally, now we have the two competing ideologies of Avatar: The Way of Water presented to us with their two respective protagonists. Jake and his belief that family is only blood and that the best way to keep one's family safe is to run away from danger, and Loak and his belief that family is more than blood. It's people for whom we are given responsibility, and that the best way to keep one's family safe is to fight all those who would harm them. And the rest of the movie is pretty much a battle between those two ideologies to see which one will come out on top. Now, I do want to quickly mention that there are also two, let's call them middle ground ideologies in the movie. The idea that the best way to keep your family safe is to fight, but that family is only blood, represented by Neytiri, and the idea that family is more than blood, but we should never fight even to keep them safe, because that just brings more death, represented by the broader Tulkun society. But Cameron never really presents these as valid answers to his questions. He mostly just uses them as foils to point out the flaws with the two main ones. So I'm just gonna skip over them altogether. Now, speaking of the Tulkun, Jake demands Loak apologize to Aonung for hitting him, which he does, after which Aonung and his gang lead Loak outside the reef where they know it isn't safe, and then they abandon him there. Left alone, Loak is quickly attacked by one of Cameron's giant shark eel thingies that the Pandorapedia informs me is called an Acula. Loak manages to hide inside the reef where the Acula can't get to him. However, he quickly starts running out of breath and is forced to try and make a break for the surface. The Acula ambushes him and would have killed him if it weren't for who we later learn is Payakan, an outcast of one of the hyper-intelligent, hyper-emotional, fanatic pacifist whales of Pandora. That is the second time Jake has directly almost gotten one of his family killed by trying to keep his family safe. But I guess who's counting? Again, people didn't really seem to like this whole space whale plot, but for me, Payakan, the killer Tulkun, was one of the best parts of the movie. Firstly, hyperintelligence in non-humanoid creatures isn't really something we see that often, and I think the whole ending showdown ended up being a lot better because of it. The way Payakan just bitch slaps a couple of those guys in the beginning of the final battle is just funny to me. But then also, he has the ability to plan ahead and outsmart his enemies. I found it really cool how he baits the harpoon twice, deflects it with his armor, and then uses the cable to take out the boat. And, I mean, I certainly didn't think I would be seeing a tactical amputation when I was going into the cinema. But secondly, and more importantly, Loak and Payakan are parallels. They're fighters in an environment of pacifism. Loak with his father, and Payakan with the other Tulkun. We learned that the Tulkun were once a violent species, engaging in bloody warfare with each other, but have since changed their ethics to fanatic pacifism and swore off all violence. However, when the humans arrived and started hunting Tulkun, Payakan tried fighting back, which caused the deaths of several other Tulkun and Na'vi, and for that, he was forever banished from Tulkun society. When Loak bonds with Payakan to find out why he was outcast, everyone loses their shit. Tonawari tells him that the Tulkun came to believe that killing, no matter how justified, only brings more killing. This is essentially Cameron putting Jake's implicit ideology into the explicit text of the movie. Violence only begets more violence. That's why the best way to protect your family is to disengage and run away. Now, at first glance, this might seem like Cameron's explicit condemnation of Loak's ideology. Payakan's banishment and Loak's own estrangement from his father are punishments for endangering the lives of their families. But I think Cameron is telling us precisely the opposite here. When Tonawari says, Payakan is a killer, that's why he is outcast, Loak answers with, you are wrong. But he isn't challenging the idea that Payakan is a killer, he is challenging the idea that there is no such thing as justified killing. He says, Payakan saved my life. If it had been one of the pacifist Tulkun nearby when Loak was being attacked by the Acula, he would most likely be dead now, and because of that, he doesn't back down even when everyone is against him. Even when both Tonawari and his father are telling him he is wrong, two great warriors who have incredible authority over his life, Loak doesn't back down, and simply says, I know what I know. And isn't that the mark of a true hero? I mean, everyone can fight the enemy when the enemy is trying to kill them, but only heroes can fight against their family when their family is doing something wrong. In the first Avatar movie, Jake is a hero because he stands up against his race, against humanity, against the only people he has ever known, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And people will say we didn't really need the teen romance subplot. But why? I don't get it. The hero always gets the girl. It's a bit sexist, sure, but it's a trope as old as storytelling. When Sirea says to Loak, I see you, I believe you, I stand beside you, it's Cameron telling the audience, this is the hero, he is correct, and not those grandpas back in the tent. And as if to hammer the point home, while the Tulkun are getting a reward for their fanatic pacifism, Quaritch explicitly asks if they ever fight back. And Scoresby, the captain of the Sea Dragon, the Tulkun hunting ship, says no. Never. On one hand, Amarita, the magic Tulkun brain juice that stops human aging, is kind of dumb. Humans are cloners, and yeah, sure, cloning might be difficult and expensive, but because Amarita is an organic substance, they should be able to recreate it in a lab pretty easily with the technology they have. However, I really like it thematically. This time around, humans aren't here for land or for resources. This time around, just moving isn't an option. This time around, humans are here to kill. So when Jake says that the Tulkun should just move far away, the thing is, there's nowhere to go. Now, of course, Jake is saying this because he knows Quirch is only after him, so the Tulkun would technically be safe if they left, but the Tulkun are more of a metaphor for Jake and his family anyway. The truth is that there is no place for Jake to run so that Quirch wouldn't be able to find him. And as I've said, this isn't Cameron's bad writing. He is making it very clear that Jake isn't thinking clearly, that he is consumed by fear. In the same breath, Jake says, the Sky People aren't going to stop, this is only the beginning. And then, you gotta tell your Tulkun to leave. Leave where exactly? Humans are an interplanetary species, and they have laid their claim on the whole planet. Another thing I think is worth mentioning here is Jake's human supremacism. Even back in the first movie, he has always had the tendency to underestimate the Na'vi ability to stand against human superior technology, which does make sense in a way. He was born on Earth and then traveled over 4 light years of empty space to get to a planet where people are walking around with their side boobs and their pubes showing. Do the Na'vi even have pubes? I mean, they don't seem to have any other body hair. I never actually thought about that. Where was I? Right. It does make sense that Jake would be a little human supremacist, but just because it makes sense that he would be, that doesn't mean he is correct. He already won against the humans once before, even though the odds were far worse. And really, if there's any example of bad writing in this movie, it is Quaritch's dumbass plan. So he commandeers
that ship, nautical town.
one Tulkun hunting ship, which is armed, but not really a warship, with a crew of a couple of dozen civilians and a dozen soldiers, and he takes it into territory populated with what I'm assuming is tens of thousands of hostiles. And then he burns their homes and kills 2 of their family members. Really, the only reason he lasts as long as he does is because the natives allowed him to last that long. The truth is that in any direct confrontation, Quaritch could only have ever lost. The numbers are simply against him. The power of all the Metcaina combined is terrifying, at least compared to Quaritch's 1 boat. It is only while the Metcaina remain divided that Quaritch can terrorize them as he pleases and pick them off one by one. Now, once the Metcaina discover the dead Tulkun and her child, they immediately want to go fight Quaritch. But Jake manages to convince them otherwise, by employing some very cheeky debate bro tactics. He uses something called the Mott and Bailey fallacy, that got its name from an old type of European castle made out of 2 distinct parts. The Mott, an easy-to-defend, highly fortified structure situated on a hill or a mound, and the Bailey, a much harder to defend and much less fortified courtyard around the Mott. And Jake has essentially been doing this for the entire 2 hours of the movie so far. And apparently, he has been doing this so successfully that the audience bought it as well. You see, the argument that Jake is representing, in the whole movie and in this particular scene, is that violence only begets more violence. This is the Bailey. Hard to defend. But whenever he is called out on this, by Neytiri, by Loak, and now by all the Metcaina, he retreats to the Mott, easy to defend, and changes his argument to, the only thing that matters is keeping your family safe. And you see, the thing is, everyone already agrees that what matters most is keeping your family safe. That is not up for debate here. What we are arguing over is how best to do this. But because Jake is arguing dishonestly, which we can conclude from the fact that when Neytiri gets mad at him and tells him they need to fight, he tells her they can't, because the Sky People aren't hunting Tulkun, they're hunting them, implying he doesn't care about the Tulkun at all. He's not arguing from a position of wanting what is best for the Tulkun, he's arguing from the position of, I will say anything I have to get my way. So, he switches his argument from violence only begets more violence to we need to keep our families safe. And suddenly, to stand against him means you're arguing in favor of getting your family killed, which no one wants. That's why Jake is so successful in getting everyone to agree with him. Well, everyone except one person. As soon as Loak hears that the Sky People are hunting Tulkun, he rushes off to warn Payakan, because he knows he is alone and there is no one else to warn him. But Neteam follows and tells him he needs to stay here where it's safe. Loak protests, "No, I have to warn him, he is my brother," to which Neteim replies with, "No, I am your brother." Another beautiful line highlighting the second real conflict of this movie. Neteim, the good and obedient son that he is, thinks of family the same way his father does, in terms of blood. But for Loak, his family is those he is responsible for, regardless of blood. Payakan saved his life, and they are friends. They care for each other, and Payakan has no one else. So it is Loak's responsibility, it is his duty to go and warn him of the danger and try to protect him as best he can, even if that will put him and other members of his family in danger. Now, of course, through some plot contrivances, it is Payakan who gets marked for death next, just as Loak and the rest of the kids reach him. But also, it kind of makes sense, if you think about it. If all the Metkaina rode out to warn their Tulkun of the danger, the Tulkun would be hiding and running, and the only one who had no one to warn him and wouldn't be hiding would be Payakan. So it's not completely just a plot contrivance. Personally, I'm more annoyed at what happens after the kids manage to remove the tracker from Payakan. All they had to do was throw the tracker away, get inside Payakan's mouth, and then Payakan swim away really quickly. I guess there's always the excuse that in stressful situations like that, people don't tend to think super clearly or outside the box. Or, inside the whale. After a short submarine chase, the humans manage to capture Tuk and Sirea in a net, and even though Loak manages to swim free, he clings onto the outside, trying to save the people he cares about to the very last, even to his own detriment. At this point, Jake and the Metkaina arrive, and we seemingly have a standoff. Now, why do I say seemingly? Quaritch tells Jake, if you want your kids back, you come out alone. But the thing is, there is no getting his kids back for Jake. What Quaritch wants is to kill him. And it's not like if Jake surrenders and dies, his kids are suddenly safe. For one, after he is dead, Jake has no way of guaranteeing that Quaritch will keep his word. And two, as we know, and as Jake has said it himself, the humans are here to stay. They want to kill everyone. So even if Quaritch does release his kids now, the humans will just keep getting stronger and stronger, because now there is no one to stand in their way. And eventually, they will kill off his kids anyway. Now, I'm not saying that since we have sadly arrived at this point, what Jake should have done is just kept charging and take the -2 kids on the chin. I'm simply saying that submitting to Quaritch and going out to die is equally as bad. But that's exactly what Jake does. He just goes out to die. He doesn't make any sort of plan with Tonavari, like, I'm going to try and cause a distraction, I'm going to make sure our kids are safe, and then you attack. He literally just tells Tonavari that all of this has been just because Quaritch wants him dead. So he's just going to go die quickly, and then presumably all the Sky People will get back on their ships and go back to Earth. And Tonavari is like, okay, fine then, you self-important narcissistic piece of shit, go die then. Fortunately, there are other characters in this movie who can think with their own heads. I really like the scene where Payakan is going around the seabed wrecking shit because he is struggling to decide what is the right thing to do. He wants to save his brother, but he's burdened by this idea of all killing being bad. And what he decides is f*** all y'all, I know that watching the people you care about getting killed and doing nothing about it is wrong. So I'm gonna go do something about it, and I don't care what you think. And he manages to cause a distraction that Jake and the Metkaina needed to engage Quaritch and his men without risking the lives of their children. And so the battle commences, and it's really, really, really cool. And that is all I have to say. In the commotion that ensues, Neteim manages to free Loak, Tuk, and Sirea. Now Neteim wants to run away immediately, but Loak says no, we gotta go save Spider, which is the first time anyone has suggested that in this entire movie. Kinda speaks volumes, doesn't it? Jake abandons Spider to keep his family safe, but Loak is willing to risk his life and his brother's life to save him, because Spider is his family as well. Now Neteim had to die saving Spider, there was no other way, for several reasons. Poetic, thematic, and character development reasons. And let's look at that last one first. Jake has always had a bit of a savior complex. He always wants to save everybody. That's why his instinct is to always first advocate for retreat, and only once he gets cornered does he choose to fight. In the first movie, when the humans wanted to destroy the giant tree the Omaticaya lived in, Jake first urges them to leave, because if they fight, they might die. And it is only after the humans take down the tree and kill many Omaticaya, including Neytiri's father, does Jake realize there is no running away. The humans don't care, they will just keep coming. Only after he loses what he fears losing the most, which in the first movie is Neytiri, is he able to go all in and become Toruk Makto. And the same is true for the second movie. Jake is completely paralyzed by the fear of losing his children, and he can't do anything that might endanger their lives. So he needs the thing he fears most to actually happen in order to be free of this fear. After Neteyam dies, Quaritch calls Jake again and tells him, "I have your daughters, come to die, or I will kill them." So essentially, we have the same situation we had just a couple of minutes ago. But where last time Jake just went to die, this time he goes on the attack, because now he is free of the fear that bound him. One thing I will criticize this movie for, and a thing I can't really explain in the context of the movie, is the disappearance of the Metcaina at this point. Like, there really isn't an in-movie justification for why they will all suddenly disappear. The only thing I can assume is that because this is still a story about Jake and his family, Cameron wanted an intimate and thematically tight ending, and honestly, I can't really be too mad at him for it. Especially because the Metcaina weren't really necessary anyway. Jake and Neytiri march in there and kill everybody like it's nothing. It's an absolute slaughter. Really makes you wonder what the hell they were doing all this time. The last one who remains is obviously Quaritch, who takes Hiri hostage by putting a knife to her throat in a last-ditch attempt to kill Jake. But at that moment, in comes Spider, the son Jake abandoned. Which brings us to the second reason Neteyam had to die. As we have established, there are two questions Cameron is asking in Avatar: The Way of Water. First, what is family? And second, how do we best protect our family? And as the movie is nearing its end, it is finally time to conclusively answer those questions. There's a really powerful moment right after Neteyam dies where the camera pans and zooms onto Locke's hands covered with his brother's blood. In other words, Locke is responsible for his brother's death. Locke wanted to go save Spider, and we'll get to that in a moment, and Locke wanted to keep fighting, and this is what happens when you fight. People you care about die. This is what Jake has been warning everyone about this whole time. This is exactly what he was trying to prevent. So is Cameron saying then that Jake was right all along, and that violence only begets more violence, and the best way to keep your family safe is to run? Well, I don't think so. As Jake is coming to free Took and Kiri, Quaritch tells him, "Your boy didn't have to die. You brought that upon yourself. You thought you could keep your family safe, but you can't. Only one way to keep them safe." Now with that, Quaritch probably means the only way to keep your family safe is to surrender and let me kill you. But there's also another interpretation. The only way to keep your family safe is to come and face me, and end this once and for all. After Jake and Neytiri, with Spider's help, again, we'll get to him in a moment, manage to save Took and Kiri, and Quaritch is the only one left on the sinking ship, he says, "I'll never stop. I'm coming for you, and when I do, I'll kill your whole family." And finally, Jake realizes there is no running from this. His family will never be safe as long as Quaritch is alive. A father protects, and Jake didn't. I think Quaritch is right. Jake is the reason why Neteyam died. He didn't deal with him. He ran away and let Quaritch grow more and more powerful until there was nowhere left to run. But most importantly, Jake abandoned Spider, and it was because Jake abandoned him that it was up to Locke and Neteyam to go and save him. Okay, let's talk about Spider now. I've listened to several interpretations of the ending between Quaritch and Spider. From "it's stupid and it makes no sense" to "this is unequivocal proof that the thing Cameron wanted to say is that blood is thicker than water. Family is all that matters." And to be perfectly honest, For this one, I cannot be 100% certain that I am correct and everyone else is wrong. But this is what I think. The movie is constantly reminding us Quaritch and Spider are nothing to each other. Yet when Neytiri threatens to kill Spider unless Quaritch releases Kiri, despite himself, Quaritch cannot let Neytiri to kill Spider. And despite himself, Spider cannot let Quaritch drown. There is a bond between them that neither one of them can deny. A bond that transcends blood and even species. A bond that cannot be rationally explained, yet a bond that both of them feel is real nonetheless. And most importantly, a bond they know shouldn't be disregarded lightly. When Neytiri is holding Spider at knife point, she says, "A son for a son." And that's obviously a threat. You killed my son, so I will kill yours. But later, when they've won, Jake says the same thing while pulling Spider in a hug. And if we go back to my original premise that whenever Jake is doing a voiceover, it is him confessing his sins. What that line is meant to mean is there will always be a price to pay for betraying the bond of family. Spider might not be Jake's biological child, but there is no denying that Jake has a responsibility towards Spider. Not only is Jake the reason for Spider being an orphan, but he watched him grow, inseparable from his children, for the past 16 years. Jake betrayed Spider when he abandoned him to be tortured for information, and for it, he paid the price. Neteyam died while saving Spider because Jake wouldn't save him. A son for a son. Because Jake betrayed one son, he lost another. When we look at Locke's story, Neteyam died because Locke wouldn't abandon Payakan and because Locke wouldn't abandon Spider. But when we look at Jake's story, Neteyam died even though Jake abandoned Spider and even though Jake wanted to abandon all the Tulkun. And from this, we can conclude that yes, if you fight, people you care about might get hurt. But there is no other choice. Because as long as there is someone or something who is trying to kill your family will never be safe. So finally, we come to the third and final reason why Neteyam had to die. The poetic reason. Neteyam and Locke are both personifications of the two competing ideologies of this movie. Neteyam, as the good son, was the embodiment of Jake's ideology, the ideology of family meaning blood, and the ideology of protection meaning running away. The ideology that the movie rejects. While Locke is the rebellious son, he represents the antithesis of Jake's ideology. For Locke, family means the people we are responsible for, and to protect them, we must stand our ground. And Neteyam dying is a symbolic representation of Locke's ideology winning. After Locke saves Jake from drowning in the sinking ship, Jake turns him and says, "I see you, son," thereby acknowledging that Locke was right all along. And to us, Jake confesses, "Sullies stick together. It was our greatest weakness and our great strength." Which is a very interesting choice of words. Sure, Jake ends on a positive. His family is his great strength. But he says it is only a great strength, but the greatest weakness. And I really think the whole movie can be found in this one line. When people say that Avatar: The Way of Water is a movie about the importance of family, they aren't wrong. But to me, that's such a reductionist way of looking at it. I mean, what kind of a boring movie would that be anyway? And why would we need it? Who doesn't already agree that family is important? Who would that movie have even been for? With Avatar: The Way of Water, Cameron asks far more interesting questions, and he gives far more contentious answers. I mean, this is the man who back in the early 1990s chose the T-1000 Terminator to adopt the form of an LAPD officer because, and I quote, "Terminator films aren't really about the human race getting killed off by future machines. They're about us losing touch with our own humanity and becoming machines, which allows us to kill and brutalize each other. Cops think of all non-cops as less than they are, stupid, weak, and evil. They dehumanize the people they're sworn to protect and desensitize themselves in order to do that job." Cameron is simply not the man who would base the movies, which will undoubtedly forever be remembered as his greatest legacy, around the message of family is important, ooh woo. What Cameron is really saying is, yes, family is our great strength. Protecting the people we care about and coming together with them to fight all those who would harm us is the best way to to ensure victory. But blindly adhering to the most exclusionary definition of family without a care for anyone or anything else will always do more harm than it does good. So family, when it turns toxic, is our greatest weakness. I know I did just go through the whole 3-hour-long movie, listing and analyzing all the scenes and themes and hidden meanings, and hopefully I've managed to convince you that I'm right. But in truth, I didn't really have to do any of that. At the very end, Cameron just puts his ideas into the text of the movie. After Natham's funeral, Jake goes to Tonavari to inform him that he and his family will be moving on. And Tonavari tells him, "You idiot! Have you also been swiping through Tinder for the past 3 hours? Your son lies with our ancestors now. We are your family." And finally, Jake gets it. He says, "I see now. I can't save my family by running. This is our home. This is our fortress. This is where we make our stand." So really, the honest truth is that the 4th highest grossing movie of all time, as of me making this video, is about how we all need to come together and do some eco-trolling. I don't know. Just a thought. I can't end on that. I'm sorry, I just cannot help myself. I have to talk about politics. The thing that originally inspired me to make this video is actually Ukraine. Specifically, the online left's reaction to Ukraine. There are so many people on the left who have from the very beginning been aggressively demanding for peace talks under pretty much any conditions Russia puts forward. And it's honestly been driving me insane. And look, I get it. The things that are happening over there are beyond terrible. I never thought in a million years that I would see in my lifetime things like this happening one country away from mine. However, in this case, peace is unfortunately, and heartbreaking though it may be, impossible. For Ukraine, there can be only victory or defeat. Just like there can be no peace between Quaritch and Jake. Just like there can be no peace between the Na'vi and the humans. These are not two equal parties in a mutual combat for supremacy. Quaritch wants to kill Jake and his entire family. Humans have come to Pandora to claim the whole planet for themselves. And unless they are stopped, they will move forward inch by inch until they have wiped every last Na'vi out of existence. Quaritch and the humans are invaders, hell-bent on extermination. If Quaritch wanted, he could just leave Jake alone, and Jake would not go after him. If the humans wanted, they could just leave Pandora, and the Na'vi would not go after them. If the Russians wanted, they could just leave Ukraine, and the war would be over. For Jake and his family, there's only one fate under humans, which is death. Whether they're killed by Quaritch now, or whether they keep running to the ends of the world until there is nowhere left to run, because the humans have taken everything. But if they fight, they at least stand a chance of surviving. And for Ukraine, there is only one fate under Russia, which is death, whether they're militarily destroyed or slowly legislated out of existence. But if they fight, they at least stand a chance of surviving. For me, what's the most important thing here is what the rest of the world chooses to do. We can do what Jake did and abandon those who we swore to protect in hopes we can save ourselves for a little while longer. But this never works. If you keep feeding your friends to the monster only grows, and eventually the monster will come after you. Except now, you've run out of friends. Or we can do what Log does and realize that we are all one family and that we all have a responsibility to each other. And the best shot we have is to stand together from the beginning. This is what Avatar: The Way of Water is about. It's about how when the threat you face is existential, there is nowhere to run, there is no place to hide, the enemy will come for you. The only thing you can do is stand together and fight. And that's the best chance you have of winning. Now obviously, James Cameron might be the GOAT, but he did not in fact predict the future 10 years ago when he first wrote the script for this movie. Just like the first Avatar, The Way of Water is first and foremost a movie about climate change, the greatest existential threat we all face today. And while with the first movie, Cameron was just testing the waters. There was a story he wanted to tell, and there was a way he wanted to tell it. But it had never been done before. So he wanted to test how it would be received, what would be the audience reaction, and most importantly, could you make money with such a colossal initial investment? And boy, could you. So while you could still find exactly the same themes in the first movie, there's no denying it was a bit rough around the edges. The themes were a little bit forced and heavy-handed. There wasn't really a lot of nuance. The humans were a bit too comically evil, the Na'vi were just a bit too noble, and the morality of the whole thing was a bit too black and white. Now, I think the thing we will get with these sequels will have well been worth the wait. Now, this is not going to be anything unexpected. I predict it is going to be just the first movie told over 12 hours. Jake is going to go around and unite all the 15 Na'vi tribes to fight the existential threat the humans pose to the Great Balance. You know, in the first movie, the humans were too actively evil. They've come to Pandora to mine resources and make money. They were the evil, meanie capitalists, which even I didn't like that much. It was too in your face. But Cameron has clearly moved away from that. Sure, there is the whole immortality juice plot, but the humans as a whole were presented more as a force of nature in Avatar: The Way of Water. Earth is dying, and their only choices are to move to Pandora or die. Sure, Quaritch is hell-bent on revenge against Jake, but to General Ardmore, Jake is more of a nuisance in her task of saving the human race. And this, I think, is going to be the role humans will be taking in the next 3 movies. As a natural disaster to be stopped. And I do think Locke will actually be the main protagonist from now on, and it will be him uniting all the Na'vi people, or at least Jake will not be able to do it without him. I also fully expect a redemption arc from Quaritch, and together all the Na'vi will fight the Sky People and win. But I don't think it will be like in the first movie where the humans will be sent back to Earth to die. I think they will be welcomed on Pandora as equals, to live with the Na'vi under the Great Balance. And after watching Avatar: The Way of Water, I'm pretty confident in all these predictions. Because that is in the end what Cameron wants us to do here on Earth. He wants us to come together, set aside these shallow differences, and realize we all have a responsibility to each other. We are all one big family, and Earth is our only home. And we need to fight to keep her safe. To go back to politics, you choosing to take the car instead of public transport, or buying a new car instead of a used car, or taking a plane instead of a train, or advocating for cheaper electricity instead of renewable electricity, or voting for those who will protect your God-given right to own 7 tanks, 3 choppers, and a 5-story mansion with a 10-hectare lawn in the middle of the desert that needs to be watered 15 times a day, you are like Jake, choosing to sacrifice others for the momentary safety and comfort of your own family. But the thing is that the enemy is coming for us all, and once it gets to you, it will already be too late. Now, this is not to say, quit your job, sell your house, and go live on an organic farm somewhere in the hills where everyone bathes once a month. Just the next time you see some teenagers throw soup at a painting, or the next time you're stuck in traffic because some climate activists glued themselves to the road, remember that there is nowhere to run. This is the only planet we have, because despite how it might look, Pandora was made in a Hollywood basement.